Good morning. This lesson is for my honors trade class. This is for 24.3. Before I get started, I'm going to say I hope everyone's doing all right out there. I got to make sure I don't step on my big Thursday dog. I'm going to try and keep this lesson pretty short and simple. I'm just going to generalize it again. I can drone on and do the 2-column proofs and make it a little bit more than it needs to be. But thinking about what situation we're in, I just want to kind of walk you through the thought process. Okay, so let me just go ahead and jump right into it and describe our goals for the lesson. We have 3 goals. Our first goal is going to be to review the criteria to have remember the symbol, review the criteria to have a parallelogram. Our second goal is going to be to find rectangles, rhombuses, and squares. And our last goal is going to be properties of rectangles, rhombuses, and squares. Now, as I look at the board, I realize I haven't drawn any squares, so I'll treat squares at the very end. All right, but let's go ahead and jump right into our first goal, review the criteria to have a parallelogram. Remember, 24.2, we had 4 starting scenarios that we were able to turn into parallelograms, and I want to focus on 2 of them. And I want to focus on the one where we had the opposite angles that are equal. That meant that we had a parallelogram, as well as the opposite sides that are congruent. That also meant that we had a parallelogram, and that ties directly into our second goal, which is to define rectangles, rhombuses, and squares. A rectangle has 4 right angles. So right away that means that opposite angles are congruent, right? And so since this is actually this, we end up having a parallelogram. So rectangles are parallelograms. And parallelograms have characteristics, right? Parallelograms have equal opposite sides, diagonals that bisect each other, and opposite equal angles. So since this started off with opposite equal angles, we get some more properties for the shape. A rhombus has 4 equal sides, right? So this is actually this, right? Opposite sides are equal, which is this. Opposite sides are equal. It doesn't say opposite sides are equal in different lengths. It just says opposite sides are equal. So since a rhombus is opposite sides are equal, it becomes a parallelogram. And so we get the properties of a parallelogram. Opposite angles are equal. We get the fact that the diagonals bisect each other. And I'm going to use the diagonals bisecting each other to make an argument about the properties here. Alright, so let's just, and a square, a square is both a rectangle and a rhombus, right? So there's a couple ways to argue that a square is a parallelogram. You could focus on the opposite angles being the same, or the opposite sides being the same, or all sides being the same. Let's go ahead and jump into our third goal, properties of rectangles, rhombuses, and squares. Alright, so here I have a poorly drawn rectangle. Remember, these mean that I have right angles. Right, and because I have opposite angles that are equal, that means that I have a parallelogram. And because I have a parallelogram, that means that my opposite sides are equal. So this rectangle has 2 pairs of opposite sides that are equal. So these opposite sides are equal, and these opposite sides are equal. And so what I did was I drew a diagonal, and I drew a diagonal, and I split my rectangle up into 2 triangles. Okay? And these 2 triangles are actually the side angle side triangle side angle side triangle congruence criteria. And because these triangles are equal and these are the diagonals of the rectangle, we can conclude that by the corresponding parts of congruent triangles, these diagonals must be equal. So not only is a rectangle a parallelogram, so that means its opposite sides are equal. It means its diagonals bisect each other, but a rectangle also has equal diagonals, right? So that's what a rectangle does beyond just a parallelogram. It has the equal diagonals. Okay. Now, let's look here at a rhombus. Now, a rhombus, remember, it's a parallelogram because it has equal opposite sides. And since it has equal opposite sides, that means that the diagonals bisect each other, right? So this length is the same as this length, and so that diagonal got bisected. This length is the same as that length, so that means that that diagonal got bisected. And what's important here is I actually have 4 identical triangles. 4 identical triangles because of side, side, side. So this little triangle is the same as this little triangle, that's the same as that little triangle, and that's the same as that little triangle. And what's really important that I need to point out here is because all these triangles in here, these little triangles are the same, what that means is that all these little angles right here, by corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. These are all identical. And since they're all identical and they intersect, that means that each angle, these 2 angles are identical and they add up to 180 degrees, so that means that they're 90. So all these angles have to be 90 degrees. And so what a rhombus does that's unique to parallelograms is a rhombus's diagonals not only bisect each other, but they're also perpendicular, meaning that they make right angles. Okay? Now, you can even go a little bit further with a rhombus. Now, notice this angle must be the same as this angle, which must be the same as that angle, and that must be the same as that angle. And what that means is that this diagonal bisected the opposite angles. Same thing is true here. These all angles must also be the same because they're in corresponding parts. So not only are the diagonals in a rhombus perpendicular, but they also bisect the opposite angles. So I'd like to just now summarize this lesson. So you're going to have to give me a second to erase everything and let me summarize what we've discovered here. Okay. And by the way, a square is both a rectangle and a rhombus. So a square has equal diagonals. A square has diagonals that are perpendicular. A square has diagonals that bisect opposite angles. So let me just erase everything here. Okay. Let me erase everything here. So let's talk about, first of all, a rectangle. Right. So if I have a poorly drawn rectangle, I know that because it's a parallelogram and I was able to make an argument here, I've argued that the length from D to B is the same as the length from A to C, right? So that's what rectangles do. They have equal diagonals. Okay, and then they also have all the other properties of a parallelogram where they are, the diagonals bisect each other, opposite sides are equal. Right. So a rectangle does all that, but this is what's unique to today's lesson. A rhombus. Remember, a rhombus, the only thing a rhombus does is it has equal opposite sides. Oh, I'm sorry, all sides are equal. And what I hope you understand from my argument is that the diagonals, they make right angles. So the diagonals are perpendicular. And again, since it's a parallelogram, we get the opposite sides, opposite angles are congruent, and the diagonals also bisect each other. So there's quite a few starting points or different avenues for each of these problems. So if you know that you have a rectangle, you have to think, can I use the diagonals are equal? Can I use the diagonals bisect each other? Can I use the fact that I have 4 right angles? Can I use the fact that opposite sides are equal? If you have a rhombus, you have to ask yourself, can I use the fact that my diagonals are perpendicular? Can I use the fact that all my sides are equal? Can I use the fact that my diagonals bisect opposite sides? Can I use the fact that did I say diagonals bisect each other? But again, you have to understand you have all of these different starting points, and finally, actually, let me show you the notation for this. So this is W, X, Y, and Z. We know that WY is going to be perpendicular to XZ, right? Because I make a right angle. And again, if we have a square, it does all of this. So let me just show you what a square does, and that will finish our lesson. Okay. So if I have a square which has all right angles, all equal sides, all right, because it has 4 right angles, it's a rectangle, and since it's a rectangle, I know that the diagonals are equal. All right, I know this length is the same as that length. Since it's a rhombus, I know that these are all right angles. All right, and opposite sides are parallel. Anyways, hopefully this is enough information for you guys to get through this section. Again, we got a couple more weeks left. Let's make sure we finish strong. Email me if you have any questions on anything. Let's just do all we need to do. And I do want to say, guys, great job with attendance. This was one of the first times in a long time I got to mark everyone present for Monday. So I do appreciate that. Let's get this assignment turned in. Have a good day, everyone. I will see you on Friday. Have a good day.